Welcome to a new edition of The Perspective. Today, fighting the good fight. It's pretty easy to grumble and complain these days. After all, we're living through a global pandemic and a media landscape that arms and fills us with too much to complain about. But what does it mean to stay in God's peace and present? And how do we keep at it in light of a lot that pulls us down? Today on the program, Mike and Julie talk with World Evangelical Association Global Ambassador Brian Stiller, who at 80 years young still travels the world with incredible stories of unsung heroes of the faith. And Rashawn Copeland is here to inspire us with his message of living in the incomparable presence of God.
Hey, welcome to Perspectives today. I'm Mike Sherbino, and Julie, welcome again.
Thank you.
I mean, you're not just the interim co-host. You're here all the time, and I'm so glad you are.
Well, I'm trying my best.
You're trying your best. Today, I love the topic. We're talking about the power of presence. Have you ever been impacted by somebody who's come into your life? They've just been there. I don't know about you, but I'm sure you have a story. We're going to share two quick stories. But, Julie, I woke up this morning, and as I was thinking about the subject, the old song by Carole King and James Taylor was just kind of floating through my mind. You Got a Friend. You remember that song?
Yes, I remember that.
I was going to break into song right now, but I didn't want.
Go ahead.
No, the ratings would just tank if I were to do that. But I wrote out the words here, and it says, close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name, and wherever. No, we won't go there. Hey, you've got a story of somebody who impacted your life, the power of presence.
I do. When I was 21, I had an operation and I had both my ankles purposely broken, and I woke up from it, and I remember being in my hospital room and the tears just streaming down my face, and right beside me was my mom, and she was there, and she was my advocate, and it was great because my payment had ran out, and she was there, and she spoke up for me, and she's just always been there for me.
Well, not everybody can say that about their folks. There's some painful experiences. I'm glad you've had that happy one.
What about you?
Well, I've had an interesting experience as well. I thought that I was the Lone Ranger, and I used to take a bunch of youth riding. And when I was riding with them, I jumped back on the horse, Julie, and the cinch had come loose.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was a racehorse, and it took off, and I spun around upside down.
Are you kidding?
They do that on the Wild West, when they're shooting underneath the horse.
So it wasn't on purpose?
No, it wasn't on purpose. Oh. And it dragged me. My foot didn't come out of the stirrup, and I was knocked out. Explains a lot of things right now. But I woke up in a hospital, and I was about 21,
wow.
and someone had got a hold of my parents, and my dad in the middle of the night drove about 4 hours, and he was just there.
Wow.
And something about people who are there when you need them.
Absolutely.
We're going to be looking at the scriptures later today, and we're going to learn about two guys. One, his name was Timothy, and the other was Epaphroditus. Julie, never call your kids Epaphroditus. I can't even spell it.
I don't know if I can even get it out of my mouth right now.
But regardless of that, they made a difference. And the reasons they made such a difference was because they showed up. They were there. And I want to encourage you today that as you think about your own journey in life, to be a man, to be a woman who shows up. That staying power and being there is something that we are desperately looking for. We long for it in relationships. Just like your mom was there, my dad was there. It became a model to me to say, I want to be one of those people that show up.
Yeah.
I'm excited about one of our guests.
Yes,
both of our guests,
absolutely.
but Brian is going to be with us today. He's been showing up, going all around the world, talking to national leaders and encouraging them in their journey.
And on that note, coming up after the break, Mike's interview with Brian Stiller. And a little later in the conversation, we will have Rashawn Copeland.
Well, I'm delighted to have with us today Dr. Brian Stiller. And as we saw in the early part of the program, Brian is the Global Ambassador for the World Evangelical Association. He's going to explain what that is, but he's also served Canadians for many, many years. He was the president of Youth for Christ, of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada as well. And then he also took over Tyndale University and Seminary, and God used him powerfully to bless that whole educational system that is making such an impact in Canada today and raising up men and women who are serving Christ both in churches and in the marketplace. Brian, I want to welcome you today, and thanks for coming on the program.
David, a wonderful day to be here with you. Thank you.
And I understand you were out golfing yesterday, and that bothers me that you've always beat me when we play golf. But how was your golf score yesterday?
Actually, my best of the summer, and it was a beautiful day. The last golfing day of the year here in Southern Ontario, but a perfect day for golfing and with some guys and just God's creation and at an old age being able to hit a ball reasonably straight and long. So it was a good day.
Well, you know, you're probably hitting your age. As long as you're shooting your age, that's pretty good because whatever. But we're going to leave that for a minute because, Brian, COVID slowed you down a little bit. I think prior to COVID hitting, how many flights had you done in the previous year around the world?
I had done, I counted them up because when COVID hit, and of course, everything shut down, you have time to think. And I thought about it. And I counted out 84 flights the year before.
Just explain to our viewers, what on earth were you doing on those flights? Because you're the Global Ambassador for the World Evangelical Association. Help us to understand what that's all about.
There are three world Christian bodies. The Catholics, about 1.2 billion. The World Council of Churches, 500 million. And the World Evangelical Alliance is responsible for 650 million evangelical Christians. Our World Evangelical Alliance is a 175-year-old organization. We have 143 national alliances. In Canada, it's the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. We have 143 of those. And so my role, I'm kind of the old white-haired guy that bumps around the world, encouraging younger leaders, interfacing with politicians and senior Christian leaders and civic leaders, and encouraging people on the ground who are being a voice and presence for a biblical faith within their own country. And many of them, of course, are in a country where there is a majority religion other than Christianity. So it's a challenge and a great opportunity. And as in the twilight years of my own ministry, it is and continues to be a wonderful privilege and honor and joy to be able to be with younger leaders, seeing them taking up the challenge in their own country. So that's what I travel and do.
Well, I mean, it's exciting just listening to it. I read your posts with interest all the time, and you've also authored numerous books. But you mentioned something as you were just describing what you're doing. You're meeting with younger church leaders and politicians, leaders of various countries who are being God's very presence in the place where He has put them. Why don't you tell me one of those stories?
You'll remember that 2 years ago, Easter, there was a number of bombings in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is that small pearl of an island south of India. And in that country, there is it's a Buddhist majority, Muslim minority, and Christian minority community. The bombings were in churches, mainly Catholic churches. And it was done by the ISIS group, which is the fundamentalist Islamic terrorist group. What happened at that point, the Buddhist government then took it out on the Muslim minority. Now, the Muslim minority was not responsible for this. It was an ISIS group that had infiltrated a wealthy family in Sri Lanka, and their children had triggered the terrorism. So here we have in that island an evangelical alliance. Godfrey is the director, and in the midst of that pressure brought about by the Buddhist government against a Muslim minority, this Christian leader exercised his presence by standing in the way of the government going after a Muslim minority, unfairly going after them.
It's mind-boggling.
So it wasn't a Christian standing up for another Christian. It was a Christian standing up for Muslims who were caught by the heavy heel of the government, and a Christian standing up and by his presence saying to the government, they were not responsible. What you're doing is unfair. And as a Christian, I am standing protecting them against the assault that your government is exercising against them. So it doesn't happen very often. Normally, our presence is to stand against those who would persecute our Christian community. But in this case, Godfrey was unusual presence. Interesting enough, he received the highest honor by government for his activity. So it's a wonderful story that justice isn't just for us. Justice is for others. And our presence has a way of infiltrating the activity of the moment. And by presence, exercising that kind of resistance towards that which can be discomforting and dehumanizing. And in that case, Godfrey was God's presence protecting another religious minority from a religious majority's persecution.
That is an incredibly powerful story. What is happening right now with Godfrey?
Well, Godfrey now has been made ambassador of religious liberty by the World Evangelical Alliance. He living in a country with a very small Christian minority, and it's interesting. There are two countries in the world where Buddhism is uncontrolled, and Sri Lanka is one of them. And so, when you think of a kind of a gentle religion in that country, it has been because of the war between the Muslim minority and the Buddhist majority. Christians sometimes get caught in the middle. Godfrey has discovered how to help people live successfully in a world where religious persecution is at times very evident, and where religious liberty is at stake. And so Godfrey has been a person that travels the world teaching Christians in other countries where they are a minority.
Wow. Let's bring Julie into the conversation right now, Brian. I know she's got a question to ask just before we go to the next break. Julie.
Yeah, I just really want to ask you, it's amazing the impact that you've had for so many years. And when someone's been involved in impacting the world in such a major scale, I always like to know who inspired you, who impacted you?
Well, of course, I had my family, I would say. I was raised in a Pentecostal minister's home in Saskatchewan. My father was bishop of the churches. He was a gentle Swede. My mother was a very dynamic English person. My siblings, I had two brothers and two sisters. My brothers were very accomplished, and they challenged me, as my sisters did as well. So I was, and then the community that we lived in, it was a community where optimism reigned, where the kind of the gentle presence of Christian life nurtured us all. And so I was greatly challenged by that. There were people like Bob Pierce, who started World Vision, was a great challenge to me, of course, in my younger years. And I found various people would intersect my life, often missionaries, people that would come to our home from around the world. And I would watch what they did, and I would listen to them, and I was inspired by them. So I guess it was a combination of people. As they say, it takes a village to raise a person. For me, it took a community to inspire me.
Oh, that's so true. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Brian. Thank you for being with us. Okay, so time now for something a little different. Brian and Mike tackled today's teaching together, and my conversation with author and speaker Rashawn Copeland.
You know, as we ponder the power of presence, if you're in a difficult situation, nothing is comparable to a person showing up, whether it's your mom, your dad, your spouse, a close friend, someone being there when we need it. And that's the story of the Apostle Paul. He's in a Roman prison. He's writing the letter to many of the churches, and in particular here today, the church at Philippi. and he talks about how Timothy, his understudy, he showed up. He was there. A man by the name of William Barclay once wrote, "One of the highest of human duties is the duty of encouragement. It's easy to laugh at men's ideals. It's easy to pour cold water on their enthusiasm. It is easy to discourage others. The world is full of discouragers, but we have a Christian duty," he said, "to encourage one another. Many a time a word of praise or cheer or thanks or appreciation has kept a man or woman on his feet. Blessed is the person who speaks such a word." And that's exactly what Timothy did for the Apostle Paul. Listen to what we read about him as Paul describes him. "For I have no one like him who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. They all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ." You know, Timothy was the real deal because he showed up. And I trust that through our teaching today, you'll begin to think about, what does it mean for me to show up? I think we have to address the whole issue of how self-centered we are. Maybe we don't want to use the word, could we be narcissistic? What are the self-centered questions? Well, what do I want to be? What should I do with my life? What are my goals and ambitions? What are my dreams for my future? Those seem like legitimate questions. But I think Timothy would say, I want to think about the God-centered questions. Why did he risk so much? What are those God-centered questions? Well, what is God's desire for me? What is it that God wants me to give my energy to? How can I do what matters most to God? And am I in the process of becoming what God created me for? Those are the searching questions. Paul talks about Timothy, how he came along, how we supported him. What an example to you and me. But he also talks about a man named Epaphroditus. And Brian's going to join me in a moment to speak on that, because Epaphroditus was also the real deal because he showed up. Listen to the scripture. He said, "I've thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and my fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for all of you and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill." Brian, when you hear about Epaphroditus, what goes through your mind? Unpack that passage for us today.
The first thing, David, I think of is that he is different than Timothy. Timothy was kind of a second to Paul as a teacher, preacher, evangelist. But Epaphroditus had a different role. He came to help Paul, sent by a church because Paul was in need. But notice what Paul says about Epaphroditus. He said, he's my brother, he's my fellow worker, he's my fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to me to take care of my needs.
Powerful words.
Two ideas come to me as I think about Epaphroditus and Paul's commentary on this, I suspect, a rather young man. First of all, as you listen to what he says, and as Paul describes who this person, he's a family member, he's working with the same objectives in mind, and he's a soldier, he's fully committed. So the two things that come to me as I read this text is that Epaphroditus is saying two things to Paul. I'm here, I'm with you. Secondly, I'm here, I'm available. He says, I'm here, I am with you. His presence was in the moment, was in the situation. It was not there out of curiosity. It wasn't there as a traveler. It wasn't there just to bring a report back to the people who had sent him. Indeed, it was a presence that was defined by his consciousness of being there. Being present doesn't mean just being in a place or just being with people. Today, of course, the ubiquitous iPhone, this thing here, you can go into a sitting room or even into a family dining room, and you'll watch people, everyone on their own iPhone, no presence within the group, just presence alone. So Epaphroditus, he was there, but he was there with presence. He was there on focus. He was there to do something. His consciousness was about someone else. And so what you said a moment ago, Dave, Mike, is so appropriate in that we take and often our presence is about self-interest. The second thing is, he says, I'm here and I'm available. My grandson was taking a job, and I said, grandson, in your work, make sure that you become necessary, that what you do becomes so essential to the work that people can't get along without you.
Love that.
So Epaphroditus was that way. He was needed by Paul, and he was there. He said, he said, what can I do? How can I use my gifts to help you?
Brian, thank you so much for sharing. We love the teaching. And when we come back, Julie is going to have a conversation with speaker and author and a man of God, Rashawn Copeland. Again, Brian, thank you for being with us.
Welcome, Rashawn Copeland. Rashawn, your most recent book, Start Where You Are, is very interesting, and I want to jump right into the questions. Today, we are talking about the power of presence, showing up for Jesus. So, about your encounter with Genesis. In your book, you shared how she made eye contact when we spoke. She didn't check her phone incessantly. She was present. She was interested in me as a person. She didn't care about fame and money. She had values. I love that line there where she was present. She was listening to me. Talk about that impact on you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. That really means a ton to me because this is a question that I feel like we all need to savor. I think when we have someone walk into our lives that is super intentional about meeting us where we are and loving us through it and leading us out of it is so important. I know for me, for instance, when I was in Los Angeles, weeks before I met Genesis, she just blew my mind because the girls in Los Angeles, they would look over my shoulder and they would, try to find someone more important to walk in the room. But this girl, she was concerned about me. She cared about me. She asked questions no one else would ask me, like, Rashawn, how are you doing? Like, what are you struggling with? How can I encourage you today? She was all overflowing with love and service. She wanted to just find ways she could serve Rashawn. Didn't know me from Adam either. And that blew my mind. I was like, this is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Wow, it's so important. It just shows you how important it is. And I read in the book how that, later on when you were, facing some really tough questions about should I stay or should I go with my life, how that relationship impacted you and on her little quote on Facebook with the scriptures. So that power of presence is incredible. So you also shared how there was a time you missed an opportunity to be available for your friend JC. How did you recover from that experience and use it as a lesson to learn from?
Absolutely. So to this very day, I'm still, I would say, haunted. I'm not fully set free from falling into this place where I was not available for one of my best friends in high school, and he took his life. But fast forward, God has sort of redeemed sort of those moments by allowing me to show up for the next person who has a need every single day, moment by moment. I have to be intentional. I have to be intentional to think about how Jesus, he didn't lock himself away in isolation, but he was so intentional about being around people. He didn't invest in buildings, but in people. So I'm like, how can each moment of every day I invest in the person right across from me, starting with the woman in my household, which is my beautiful wife and my children, and spill it out to the streets. That's what I want to live and be and become.
That's awesome.
Is love and available.
You know, being available doesn't mean we're not faced with fear. I appreciated your quote where you said, Jesus never asked us to crave security. We are saved to be brave. Can you elaborate on this?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I know for me, I can get on a stage and I can do a spoken word. I can preach a sermon. I can do all this stuff in a brave way because I'm confident because of the one who's equipped me. You know, I read the scriptures, I'm empowered, but why is it that when I'm out at a grocery store, it's hard for me to go up to, a Caucasian sort of older white woman to just share with her the message of Jesus? I have that problem. Or the businessman or the athlete at OU, at a major university. I don't know why it's so tough. And why do I fear sort of men sometimes in walking up and sharing the love and hope of the gospel? Because every time God's proved to be faithful, whenever I walk in confidence and, be reminded that he's equipped and empowered me to love people right where they are, no matter who they are.
Well, we've got about 30 seconds left, but I want to just say many times we may feel inadequate about our abilities to reach out. But I like how you said, you may think I'm too broken to reach out, but believe it or not, God's purposes will be accomplished through your struggles. Tell us in 15 seconds what you mean by that.
Absolutely. See, God, he didn't come for the perfect person. He looks for resumes with blemishes and gaps. We love flawless resumes, right? But Jesus said, I didn't come for the person who has it all together, who has the perfect life, but I came for those who are sick and need a doctor and know they need help. So you are the perfect candidate for God's grace today, no matter where you are, no matter what you're struggling with. And I want to remind you of that. He'll meet you right where you are.
That's awesome. What a way to end it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rashawn.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie.
You know, those are powerful words. As he said, God is looking for resumes with blemishes on them. I want to remind you today, as we close the program, that God is inviting you to be that person, that Timothy, that Epaphroditus, that Rashawn, who steps into the lives of people and says, I am here. You can count on me. When we do that, the presence of Christ will be seen through your life. But could it be today that you feel lonely? You're just desperately wishing, would someone come into my own life? Well, I want to invite you to pray and to ask the Lord himself to be a very present help to you in time of trouble. If you call out to him, he will hear your prayer today.